be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm actually a journalist working on medieval in the Near East, but what I'm about to talk about today has nothing to do with my conventional research. It has to do with work that we've been engaged with ever since October 7th. I think that it's less of a, I would say, an academic presentation. It's more sort of a description of what we had done based on a variety of circumstances that took place in Israel. You will see. Responding now. Okay, so some background for you. 7th of October and its impact on Israeli society. For many, I don't know, maybe perhaps for most Jews living in Israel, the 7th of October has been really the resurrection of trauma. The memory of the Holocaust, despite the fact that it's been for some time, is still fresh in the minds of Jews living in Israel or Jews living anywhere in the world. And the scale of the event that took place on that Saturday, that terrible Saturday, really brought up all that kind of traumatic experience that has been sort of following us over the generations in Israel. Also, for many liberal Israelis, Jews especially, there were so-called disillusioned liberals now, who for years have been advocating for peace and shared society, but now this terrible event has brought them to the conclusion that there is no future for Jews and Arabs, Palestinians and Jews, whatnot. This is just proof that there's no one to talk to, there's no one to negotiate with if they are able to commit such atrocities. And then there were the I told you so hardliners, so who were ready from the start, how shall I say, not opposed to, but very much kind of showing a hardline position when it came to matters of reconciliation, compromise, etc. Now they were able to say, I told you so. We should have never compromised with the Palestinians. Look what they're doing to us. Here's proof of our position. Now it's, point made. In the broader public, there was a lot of now suspicion, anger, hate. There were these neighborhood patrols initiated. People were given guns. Guns permits were issued very, very generously. Arabic was difficult to hear in the public sphere. People felt uncomfortable hearing Arabic because of what it happened. Very tense environment, very tense atmosphere. I'm talking about the first few weeks, but even after that, people were actually worried that what had happened in the Gaza Strip will now happen in every town in Israel, because Israel, as you may know, is a very small country. The proximity between Jewish and Arab populations is almost zero distance, and there was a great sense of insecurity. The scale of the event really led people to feel this is at their doorstep. And among the Arabs, there was a lot of fear now. How will the Jews treat us? How will they behave to us? How will they react to us? And there was a lot of perplexity, because how is it that our brethren have committed such terrible actions? And there was some shame as well. These were kind of the more of the common feelings that were prevailing among the Jewish and Arab populations in the country. And all in all, you could say the events, the 7th of October and its aftermath, was really a blow to hopes for peace and shared society ideals. The dominant feeling in the street was that right now there is no future for Jews and Arabs in Israel or in the region. And lastly, there was a great concern that what had occurred on the border will gradually enter cities in Israel, especially in mixed cities in Israel. I'll talk about that very shortly. And there was a lot of concern. And what prompted that last concern were memories from May 2021. I don't know how many of you are familiar with those events, but back in May 21, that was another round of escalations between Israel and the Hamas, instigated initially by a violent confrontation in eastern Jerusalem that led to another cycle of violence. But this time, this cycle of violence was somewhat different from past cycles in the sense that in a series of cities, there were outbursts of violence and clashes between Jews and Arabs. These are what we call mixed cities. Cities like Lod, Ramle, Akko, Haifa, and Jaffa, back in May 21, saw some of the worst violence. Synagogues and businesses were burned, and Jewish and Arab mobs battled in the streets. Over 1,000 people, mostly Arabs, were arrested within several days. And this also, you might say, was another event that has remained in the collective memory of Israeli society. Now, mixed cities. When I say mixed cities, and here you have a few of them, I'm talking about cities that have few common characteristics. These are cities that consist mostly of a Jewish majority and an Arab minority. It ranges from 10 to 30% of the total population. And they're characterized by tension, feelings of discrimination, historical baggages, Jews vis-a-vis Arabs and vice versa, and also some significant socioeconomic gaps between Jews and Arabs. Here you have a list of the more prominent mixed cities in Israel, and you can see how the percentages vary in different cities. These are municipalities or urban areas consisting of both Jews and Arabs. Many towns precede 1948, the year Israel was established, such as Jerusalem, Akko, Lod, Ramle. They were all there before. And Arab citizens in these cities often identify themselves as Palestinians. This doesn't necessarily have to happen. Some Arabs do not identify themselves as Palestinians. So the Palestinian National Party does not always go hand in hand with the Arab ethnicity. But many, perhaps the majority, of the Arabs living in these cities identify as Palestinians. Can we keep the questions to the end? Yes. Yeah. Great. As I said, Arabs typically make up 10 to 30%. Jews are the majority. They consist of mixed neighborhoods that often show a high measure of tensions between Jews and Arabs over a variety of issues. There are considerable socioeconomic gaps between Jews and Arabs in favor of the former. And there are often disputes over land or housing in these towns. Finally, next to intercommunal violence that may occur every once in a while in these towns, there are also considerable or notable attempts towards shared society building. So there is that tension, that difficult side to the reality in these cities, but at the same time, it's not black and white, of course. There are a variety of initiatives, both municipal or local level or civic, to get Jews and Arabs to find a way to live together in these mixed towns. Okay, so when we talk about building shared society through the work of religious actors, which is really the core of my discussion today, there are a few underlying premises. First of all, religion is deeply interwoven into both individual and collective identities and plays a paradoxical role in both fueling and quelling conflict in Israel. So, for instance, think of Palestinian national ideas that on the face of it shouldn't be religious at all, but nonetheless, the Dome of the Rock often features in slogans or images that seek to promote nationalistic ideals. On the other hand, for Jews, nationalism and religion has been intertwined from day one. So it's obviously a very complex matter, and often religion is could be used to, or religious terminology and features and motifs are employed in order to promote national or nationalistic agendas, and sometimes they can also be enlisted for trying to get people to talk to one another. So it can work both ways. And in Israel, religious communities play central roles in civic, social, and political spheres of life. Here, this won't be much of a surprise to you because, as everywhere in the world, primarily monotheistic communities, Jews, Christians, Muslims, they have communal frameworks that are not merely spiritual or ritualistic, but also have civil and social aspects to them. Things like education, law, social solidarity, etc., are matters that are within the purview of the religious community. This is something that has been, it's a historical phenomenon, goes back to late antiquity or even before that. And in the 21st century, it's still very much applicable. And especially in a country like Israel, where surveys have shown that around 80% of the population, Jews and Arabs, have some kind of relationship with God or belief or religion, and that's a huge number. And this renders the role of religious leaders very central. So Israeli society is highly religious, and the objectives, when you want to think about working with religious leadership in order to promote ideals of shared society, you can think about how beliefs and religious ideals can be instrumental in confronting political realities. Ideals of peace, of the sacredness of life, of mutual respect, love your neighbor, love your stranger, love the other, things of that sort that are sort of running through different religious traditions can be enlisted in order to address these issues. They allow us to work in order to foster understanding, mutual respect, and eventually cooperation between different religious communities. And they also allow us, by getting people to talk to each other based on these religious ideals, they assist us in breaking down stereotypes or dispelling misunderstandings, prejudices, and incorrect assumptions by getting people to talk to each other and not thinking about each other through screens or texts or videos or recordings of some sort, but actually talking to each other. That has this kind of I don't know, it has this a soothing effect over the disquiet that people often hold with regard to the religious, to the ethnic other, or the national other. And so this boils down eventually to finding common ground and common values around which different religious leaders and communal members can work together, can gather and promote common objectives. The means to achieve those is to, first of all, establish trust between people, getting to talk to each other, getting used to each other, to familiarize themselves with the realities of their neighbors. All these dynamics eventually lead to some kind of openness and readiness to trust the other that so far has not been trusted. Based on that trust, you can later think of how these people can actually initiate practical work and collaborate. And that again feeds into building trust, because when people get used to working with each other, they're again trusting each other. Empathy is a very crucial ingredient here. Empathy is a lacking resource in Israeli society when it comes to Jews thinking of Arabs and vice versa. And when religious leaders, or any other group members, by the way, sit with each other and hear about each other's problems, they all of a sudden are exposed to the fragile side of the other, to the not just fragile, but sort of the precarious position that people often possess given their daily realities. And by hearing their stories, empathy is something that can gradually begin building. And of course, in the course of that, these interactions serve to remove baggage, serve to remove a variety of earlier assumptions, and sort of allow people to enter the room or enter the shared environment in a way that they put aside for a moment their old ideas or their traumas even, in a way that will allow them eventually to work together. Part of that is, of course, to prioritize dialogue within the religious groups themselves in order to clarify issues. So it's not just about people from different groups talking with one another, but also within the same group. It's essential that members of that group start clarifying issues. Where are we afraid? Where are we concerned? About what are we angry? And so by airing those issues and by confronting them hands-on, this eventually not only had a ventilating effect, but also a concretization of the issues at hand. What are our biggest concerns? And with those concretized, they can go back to the dialogue, the sphere of dialogue, and be much more focused on the issues rather than be sort of dispersed and just shoot out anything that they have in mind, which is obviously ineffective and not constructive. Confidence, of course, is a very important thing. Dialogue needs to be conducted in a safe environment. People need to feel that they have the freedom to say everything. They have the freedom to articulate themselves in the most clear way and be loyal to their ideals, to their beliefs, to their ideologies. And that's crucial for a productive dialogue. So these are a long list of means by which we get people to talk to each other, and based on which we can hope to achieve something. And of course, the last point here is the complexity of perspective. Rather than taking on a binary perspective of reality, of black and white, good and bad, and all those kind of dichotomies, what we try to get people to appreciate that things are complex, that there are hues in this picture, that it's not all one color or two colors, but a person is not just Muslim or not just Jewish, is not just against or for something, but has a variety of sentiments in play. And an individual is not just part of a singular community, but actually is part of a variety of communities at the same time. And this complexity is very important to push forward when it comes to getting people to talk to one another. Let's zoom in now into Haifa. As you can see, Haifa is located in the north of Israel. It has a mixed Arab population, mixed Jewish Arab population since the late 19th century under Ottoman rule. After 1948, most Palestinian Arabs left the city. So just a minute before the founding of the State of Israel, there were something like 70,000 or 75,000 Arabs living in the city, and about the same number of Jews. And immediately after the war, the number of Arabs that are believed to have stayed in the city went down to something around 3,500. The rest had left the country, mostly to Lebanon, to Syria. Some of them came back, but the beginning of Jewish-Arab relations wasn't very pretty. Today, Jews make up around 82% of the population, while Arabs, consisting of both Muslims and Christians, comprise around 14%. The rest are not Jews, not Arabs, but people who are sort of external to that division. The Arab population in the city is centered in neighborhoods downtown, like it's called Wadi Nisnas, Abbas, and Halisa. And there are mixed neighborhoods that includes the French Carmel, Kiryat Eliezer, Hadar, Ain Hayam, and Ot Peres. When I say mixed neighborhoods, I'm not just talking about Jews and Arabs living in the same neighborhood, but actually in the same street, but actually in the same apartment building. And they often send their kids to the same school. And they share working places, and they govern the city together, and the police force is made out of Jews and Arabs, and the medical teams are Jewish and Arab. These are some of the more common features in Haifa when it comes to shared society. So the city has been known to avoid major intercommunal violence over the decades compared to other mixed cities. Haifa is nothing close to cities like Ramle or Lod, or Jaffa or Akko. It's a quiet city, and we can open for discussion. Why has it been so? There are a variety of explanations, but and as I mentioned, this shows up in integrated neighborhood schools and workplaces, and the city is often branded as a model for Jewish-Arab coexistence in Israel. However, there are still significant socioeconomic gaps between Jews and Arabs in the city, and I could elaborate on those. And there is a de facto segregation in housing patterns. So despite the fact that I mentioned that there are mixed neighborhoods and Jews and Arabs living together, the vast majority of the Jews are living separately from the Arabs in what could be mostly identified as Jewish neighborhoods. And their housing patterns are very different from those of the Arabs, not just in terms of architectural style, but also in terms of the quality of the housing and the services that they can receive thanks to their proximity to centers and offices. Arab residents often face employment difficulties and earn lower incomes on average. Arab parties and representatives are involved in Haifa's municipal government and politics, and Arabs feel discriminated against in areas like housing, educational infrastructure, social services, and policing at times. So it's far from being pink. There are good sides to it, but there are still a lot of challenges. Okay, so we spoke about 7th of October, we spoke about May 2021, We spoke about the city of Haifa. All these things together sort of emerged into a great concern that we had in Israeli society that something very scary is about to happen in Haifa. Mixed population, very tense atmosphere, a lot of tension between Jews and Arabs. What's preventing from what had happened back in May 21 from happening again now, shortly after October 7th? And so we, at the Haifa Laboratory for Religious Studies, we took a very serious initiative in that respect. But before I tell you about this initiative, I want to say a few words about the laboratory. The laboratory, based at the University of Haifa, was established back in 2020, COVID time. It's an interdisciplinary academic platform, bringing together faculty and early career researchers, graduate students who hail from a variety of disciplines. These are not necessarily people working on theology. It could be people coming from law, from political science, social sciences, economy, you name it. Many of them are there. It's only the only thing that they share is their common interest in religion, but in their respective discipline. So that's why I typify it as interdisciplinary. The premise is that religious communities are not merely spiritual, that religion operates in civil and social spheres, and to that end, we divide our work in three principal spheres: research, outreach, and education. We conduct research about religious phenomena in a variety of levels of life, from a variety of directions. For instance, just to name and to give one quick example, we have a research team meeting throughout the year looking at the unique features of Islam in Israel. Or another team looking at matters pertaining to gender equality within the Druze community in Israel. Or another team looking at bridging the gaps between Islamic and Jewish law when it comes to family matters. And I could go on, we have few of those. We have doctoral students coming in for an annual fellowship, and on and on and on. Outreach are our works, the work that we conduct with religious communities. So we get faculty members or graduate students to be in touch with different communities, not just in Haifa, not even just in Israel, sometimes regionally, in order to create joint work between the academia and these communities in order to promote the civil and social qualities of religious communal life. And education, and I'll elaborate more on that outreach in a minute, because when I'll show you what we have done post October 7th, that will give you a more concrete idea. And as far as education, our work is not just with our students, but also with society at large. For instance, we're going to hold a major conference towards the end of June in Jerusalem to advocate for the presence of religious leadership around peace negotiation tables, or to get religious communities involved in safeguarding diplomatic ties between countries. We feel this is a lacuna, and so we're advocating for the need of including religious leadership, communities, and ideas in a variety of regional affairs. And also, as far as education, we go to high schools, we speak with students, we get religious leaders to speak with students. Next year, we're going to initiate academic courses in high schools in Haifa as a pilot project in order to promote study of religions as a means of getting students from different religious communities to be closer to one another. So this is the lab, and shortly after October 7th, we initiated an emergency summit that brought together over 60 religious leaders and educators. And what really had happened is, this is happening, I think, somewhere around mid-November 23. So it's really less than a month and a half after the terrible events. And these pictures, I imagine you understand, they shouldn't be taken for granted. Having Jews and Arabs or members of different religious communities sitting in the same room, listening to each other, being able to respect each other's position was not an easy thing back in November 23 with all the emotions that were sort of dominating the air. And we posed a very simple questions to all these people. And I'm reminding you what we're concerned about now is about violence entering a city like Haifa being a mixed city. And so we posed to these religious leaders a very simple question. We didn't ask them, what should others do in order to keep us safe? We didn't ask them, who do you think is responsible for what has happened? We didn't ask them, what do you expect your neighbors to do? We asked them a simple question. What can you do as religious leaders in order to prevent violence that has caught our borders entering our city? What can you do? What can you initiate within the purview of your religious authority, your communal authority, in order to keep our city safe, to keep people, give people a sense of security and keep everything peaceful? Now, while on the one hand, their answer showed a lot of good intention and an interest in joining forces and keeping the city safe, their ideas we didn't feel were very effective. They were not very promising in what they can deliver down the road. So as a result of that, we turned to create the Haifa Multi-Faith Forum. We started out by getting these people, they totaled in 20, their number totaled in 20. These were Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Druze leaders, by the way, men and women, coming from a variety of denominations in their respective communities. Their only entry ticket was that they had to have a community behind them. They couldn't just stand and represent themselves. They had to speak for a community that they were leading. Because there are many religious leaders who have no communities. Here we wanted people to come in representing communities. And we brought them to campus. Campus was closed because of the war. We brought them to campus for a series of 6 2.5-hour meetings. Nobody knew about it. We kept it secret. We didn't send it out to the media. We didn't take pictures. We didn't record. We wanted to give them a feeling that they could speak freely. And during those 6 very intense meetings, we started a process in which all those things that I mentioned earlier were starting to take place. They started to learn about each other, talk to one another, build trust towards one another, develop empathy towards one another. And it was based on these stages that eventually they were able to see that by working together, they could achieve much more than operating separately. When we, maybe on the 4th or the 5th meeting, posted them, what happens right now? What do you do? How do you respond if a group of kids hailing from X community begins to throw stones at a house of worship that belongs to another community? How do you respond to that? So one religious leader said, oh, I'll call the police. The other religious leader said, oh, someone in the municipality, I'll turn to him and they can help us. I'll go down there and speak with the kids. Maybe I'll bring my own community and we'll start fighting them. Things like that. But eventually they realized, actually, I could call my religious counterpart from the other community. We could go down together, or we can make a few calls and call people that we know on the other side. And if we work together, maybe that would be the most effective way to sort of quell the conflict. In these meetings, they looked at each other's texts, they exchanged information about their communities, about their religious traditions. They discussed case studies, such as the one that I just mentioned, of case studies of conflicts. and they started to plan ahead. The outcome, before I talk about the outcome, I should mention a few of the challenges behind the scene here. So, for instance, the group consists of rabbis who come from what we call National Orthodox. These are not ultra-Orthodox that some of you know, wearing the black clothing. These are not Reform Jews. These are not conservative Jews. These are Orthodox Jews that are highly nationalist, if not nationalistic, in their sentiments. They are very right-wing hardliners. They are the ones that maybe right now are supporting the continuation of the war and Israel's taking of Gaza and that kind of thing. These are the people that are anything but liberal in their approach to society and politics in the region. But it's important that we talk with them, not with people who think the same as us. So we made a point to bring those into the room. However, before they were prepared to get into the room, they made a few preconditions. One of them was that before we enter the room, we want all the people gathered in this room, all the Arabs or the Muslims or the Christians, to sign their loyalty to the state of Israel. And we would like the Muslims to admit that the land of Israel features in the Quran and is promised to the Jews. And a few other such preconditions. Gladly, we were able to get them off these demands, because if we would insist upon them, we simply wouldn't have a partner for them from the non-Jewish side. But this is something that should be noted. On the other hand, there was a lot of the Muslims, specifically, not the Christians, but the Muslims were, how should I say, not so enthusiastic about this initiative, to put it lightly. And it took some cajoling and some pressure in order to get them in the room. The Christian clergy that participated in this initiative, what troubled us in their regard was their passiveness. You could see in the conversations that the Jews were very vocal, the Muslims were vocal, but the Christians were often very quiet. The Druze, again, were vocal, the Ahmadis were vocal, but the Christians maintained this very passive, maybe cautious position in the room. And what came up again and again from everybody's direction were calls for sincerity. We want to hear the truth. We want to know what you really think. Don't, sell us off with all sort of pretty words and the kind of old discourse that used to typify interfaith initiatives, but we want to know what you really think. Often when someone says, I want to know what you really think, is really a request for confirmation for predispositions that are held by the person making the demands. Notice that. When it came to religious ideas, there were always these, or even national positions, there were these claims for absolute truth. And on the other side, there was a constant lack of trust. These were all issues that sort of loomed over the group throughout the series of meetings that we held. We made a point when we led these meetings to prevent provocation, to bring into the room mediating voices. So there were Jews, there were Muslims, but for instance, the Druze or the Ahmadis that were in the room were sort of mediating ideas from one side to another, because the Jews tended to trust most the Druze because they serve in the army. And the Muslims tended to trust the Ahmadis because although they disagree with them theologically, they're still Arabs, Muslim-oriented, and so there's a level of trust. So here the Druze and the Ahmadis, and the Christians as well to a certain extent, played a role of mediating ideas across divides. And we made a point for, despite the differences, despite the gaps, despite the lack of trust and all that, to constantly search for a common ground in which people could gradually find things that they actually share. And I want to end this part by telling you a story about the rabbi goes to see the imam. So as the meetings were about to be concluded, one of the initiatives that we posed to the group that it could take is to come out with a public declaration of mutual solidarity between the different religious communities in Haifa. And the members of the group agreed to it. And but they said, before we come out with that declaration, we want to draft it, and we want to get a confirmation from our communities that this is something that they're ready to live with. After 2 weeks, we were about to come out with the declaration, but a day before, I get a call from one of the more prominent rabbis in the group, who says to me, listen, we like the declaration, but we want a certain clause to be added to it. We would like the group to say that the members of the different communities respect each other, we want to live together, we want to preserve life in Haifa, etc., but we also collectively condemn the acts of Hamas. So I said to him, but what does Hamas have to do with Haifa? Hamas is not in Haifa. The group has been meeting about Haifa. It has not been meeting about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What does Hamas have to do with anything here? And the rabbi said, this will be a way for us to really make sure that the Muslims undersigned are sincere. Because if they're willing to go public with a condemnation of Hamas, that means that they're really on our side. I told him, yeah, I can see your point here, but I don't see that working out. I don't see the Muslims signing a declaration that includes a condemnation of Hamas when we are just a few months after the beginning of the war. He said, well, speak with the imam, see what he has to say. So I called the imam shortly after, and the imam told me, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to sign a declaration that has a condemnation of Hamas in it. I say, fine, I understand, I respect that. So I put down the phone, and an hour later, the rabbi called me and said, no, what? Did you sign a deal with the Muslims about the declaration? I said, no, it's not going to happen. He said, what? I can't understand. Why can't it happen? And he just rejected the idea. So let's go and talk with the man. So on that very day, I go and pick up the rabbi with my car, and we drive to one of the main mosques in the city where that imam serves. And it's already evening time. And as we step out of my car, the rabbi, a 62-year-old man, very prominent in the community, leads a major synagogue in the city, highly educated. You can't say anything. You can't say that this guy is ignorant or is some kind of peripheral figure. And he confides to me that this is the first time he actually is about to enter a mosque. Guy has never been to a mosque, but he has a whole theory about what is Islam, who are the Muslims, etc., etc., etc. And that for me was an eye-opener. But the big drama took place when we entered the mosque. As we entered the mosque, we entered the imam's chamber, and these two leaders are sitting in front of me. And I'm saying to them, look, the mere fact that you guys are sitting here today in front of me and ready to talk to each other is an achievement in itself, and maybe we should satisfy ourselves with that. I mean, if you can't agree about the declaration, that's fine. You know, we have to be realistic. This is not an easy time. And I didn't finish my sentence, and the imam says, stop. Look, I don't have a problem with a clause condemning Hamas. My community won't have a problem with a clause condemning Hamas. However, when I step out of Haifa and I go to Jerusalem or the West Bank, people will start pointing at me and saying, this is the imam that signed a declaration with Zionist rabbis condemning Hamas. And this will not only endanger me, but endanger my family. And that's something I'm not prepared to do. And he didn't get a chance to finish his sentence. And that rabbi, insisting upon the clause condemning Hamas, said, oh, I had no idea. We don't need to have a clause condemning Hamas. The day after, the declaration came out. It showed up in a variety of media. I was interviewed on television about it. It sent out a very significant message. And this is the declaration. I won't take the time to read it right now. Okay, we can read a bit of it. We, representatives from the Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and Druze religious communities in Haifa, have convened in recent months in order to promote an active leadership that will work together to safeguard a shared civic society and prevent violence. In this challenging and tense spirit, we have recognized the great importance of establishing a group of religious leaders from the various faiths who study each other's religion and aspire to promote good neighborliness and uphold a dignified way of life in our city. The dialogue among us, the tolerance and mutual respect are rooted in the tradition and sacred scriptures of each and every one of us. And here they quoted, I didn't include it in the slide. The various religions emphasize the value of respecting others, prohibiting harm to them, caring for others, responsibility towards your neighbors and relatives, and above all, the sanctity of life. Trust among group members was built step by step, meeting after meeting, and can serve as a foundation and model for the religious communities we represent in the important process in which we have participated. Our personal security depends on our cooperation, our ability to reduce points of friction, and our ability to inspire respectful dialogue, striving for agreements and good neighborliness. Haifa, our beloved city, is characterized by diverse groups and communities, and we all desire the prosperity of the city and its residents out of a deep commitment to the state of Israel and its laws. So here you can hear a bit the rabbis in the background. We commit to being active partners in promoting good neighborliness, mutual respect, and tolerance, and we call on the public to preserve the unique character of our city, Haifa. Following that declaration that came out on March 24, we started to think with the religious leaders what should be the next steps. So we decided to focus, or they decided to focus on activities that will enhance existing ties between them, that will bring in others from their community, so broadening the circle, work to counter lack of knowledge and suspicions, and create an emergency task force for times of conflict. Also, shortly after the declaration, we approached the municipality, the mayor, and we said, hey, we have here a group that is willing to work together, a multi-faith group. We are offering the city to embrace it and to make it a formal entity within the city that will deal with the issues the group is concerned with. And they immediately, the mayor and the city representatives immediately approved of this. And a few months later, on September 24, we had a big ceremony at the city hall where the multi-faith council of the city of Haifa was announced. Since then, the group has been leading a variety of initiatives. Over here you see, for instance, a multi-faith panel that was held in one of the high schools in the city. The mere fact that the students are witnessing Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and Druze leaders sitting together, talking to one another is a wonderful example at a time like this, but also how they articulate themselves in a way that shows not only mutual respect, but also the ability to listen to opposing ideas in a sort of civil manner is a very crucial message to the groups of students that come to listen to them. In addition to work in high schools, the group has conducted mutual visits to the different communities, and it's now about to hold panels in those communities. As far as plans for the future, we hope to expand the work in Haifa. We are now initiating similar work in other mixed cities in Israel, based on the Haifa model. And thank you for listening.
You already elaborated. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for the very good work that you guys done there. I have just a quick point with regards to the word Arabs you use, Arabs versus Jews. So I have a quick glance, and I just googled that Arabs are not only included Muslims, but also includes Christians and Jews. So I was wondering that is there any problem of as we know that Muslims and Jews they have problems. So is there also any problem between Christian communities with Jews and Jews communities with Jews? As you brought Arabs that it includes Christian Jews and Muslims versus Jews.
Okay. So, like I said earlier, I think the elephant in the room is the Jewish Muslim sort of the greatest aspect of the conflict. That said, I think it would be wrong to say that all Christians are not part of the conflict or that they are voiceless in that respect. That's not necessarily the case. But I don't know if you're aware of the fact, but Christians are very few in the country. The total population in Israel today is something like 10 million people, out of which 77% are Jews, and about, I think, 19 to 20% are Arabs, of which something like 18% would be Muslim, or 70% would be Muslim, 2% would be Christian, and another percent would be. These are the relative sizes. I thought you were about to ask me about frictions between Muslims and Christians, because there are, in fact. It's not just Muslims and Jews, but there's a lot of tension between Muslims and Christians in Israel, in Palestine, in other countries in the region. And what the Christian communities are witnessing is a very large wave of migration from the Middle East to Europe, North America, and other parts of the world. However, from a methodological point, it's crucial to put everyone in the room because, as I said earlier, the diversity is actually a very useful component in facilitating dialogue. Diversity is not just a diversity of beliefs or traditions, but it is also a diversity of approaches towards conflict. And there are different levels of trust between different religious communities. And the more diverse the room is, by the way, not just religiously, but also gender-wise, the more diverse the room is, or the group in dialogue, this is more conducive to an effective dialogue. So, did I answer your question? Okay.
Thank you so much. It's very fascinating. My name is Kamran. I'm a PhD student here at and as a Baha'i, the city of Haifa is very special to me. So thank you. One thing I wanted to ask you about was you mentioned that in the meeting, or maybe it was after, but with the declaration about condemning Hamas, you tried to essentially say like we are not going to level shift to have this discussion be about Hamas or the war. We're talking about Haifa, like we're limiting this.
Yeah.
When these people go back to their communities,
Yeah.
their communities care. Primarily care about Haifa, maybe, but it's very important still. And so, once you left this space where you could control the level of discussion, did you see this task force kind of being able to address in their own communities this larger, like essentially go back because they can't constrain it so much? Or do you think this has some ability to open people's perspective on those higher level issues?
I want to respond to this question in a two-stage way. First of all, I would like to know that at this point of the conflict, we're no longer in a position to talk about peace. We're no longer in a position to talk about the most adequate political solution, two-state solution, one-state solution, confederacy, whatnot. No longer in a position to talk about territorial compromise, Palestinian state, the return of the refugees. All of these issues are now put aside. They're put aside because the level of animosity between Jews and Arabs is so high that the challenge right now is to lower the barriers. The challenge is to get people first and foremost to talk to one another. We no longer have the luxury to talk about political solutions. Right now, we have to talk about basic things of communication. So what we're trying to do is take religious figures and values and ideas in order to facilitate down the road an ability to talk about competing narratives. Okay, that's the first thing that I wanted to say. Having said all that, we don't escape political issues. For instance, when one of the imams in the room said, "It's difficult for me to be here in the room whilst my Palestinian brethren in Gaza are being killed," that was a very difficult statement for the Jewish religious leaders to hear. But I was glad it was made because we're not sort of shying away from it. And after that meeting, when the imam said those words, one of the rabbis came to me and said, "What does this guy have to do with Arabs living in Gaza? He's living in Haifa, they're living, what's the connection? I mean, this whole idea of being part of a broader national identity, I don't get that." I waited with an answer. Because a few months later, that same rabbi was asked to say a few words in the ceremony that was held at the city hall. And you'd be amazed to hear what he had to say. He said, "This group is very important to me. What we have achieved together is very significant. And today, I can appreciate why certain Muslim leaders here would feel empathy and sympathy with people living in Gaza." But he could never have said that without those meetings. So the point is that what seems like a Haifa project will have down the road broader political implications.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is more a matter of curiosity than very substantive, but I was curious about the Druze and the Amadi who were part of it. I mean, these are small part of the population, but they're kind of visible as part of it. Can you say more about how they fit into and where they're Baha'i actually
Where?
Baha'i in the conversation? Or
The last one is
more of an international.
The Baha'i don't have, by law, a community in Israel. And they're not part of this project because we wanted people with communities. The Druze, I don't know how many of you are familiar with their history, but we're talking about a religion that began in the first half of the 11th century in Egypt. Their theology is secretive. They are divided to what is called in Arabic Okal and Juhal. The Okal are the knowledgeable ones and the Juhal are the ignorant ones. The most of the ignorant ones are the vast the members of the community. Most of them are the ignorant ones because it's a secret religion. The only chosen ones are entitled to know its secrets, and those are the knowledgeable ones. They are dispersed in three main countries: Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. In Israel, we have 150,000 Druze living, mostly in the region of the Carmel and the Galilee, which are the northern parts of Israel. Traditionally, they have they are loyal to the country or to the state in which they reside. They don't have separate national sentiments. Traditionally, wherever they live, they are loyal to that country. So they serve in the Israeli army. Some of them are very prominent in the higher echelons of the military service as officers, generals, etc. They serve in the government. And to an extent, they receive better treatment than other non-Jews in the country. We brought them into the room, because first of all, they live there. And this is a multi-faith group. But also because of that mediating effect. Because the Jews feel very comfortable with them. Because they serve in the army and they're known to be loyal, etc., etc. And if the Druze are able to mediate certain ideas that initially the Jews weren't able to digest, that's helpful. Who are the Ahmadis? The Ahmadis are really outspring of Sunni Islam, initiated somewhere in the late 19th century in India. They diverge from mainstream Orthodox Islam on a variety of issues, but two principal ones are the fact that Muhammad was not the seal of the prophets, and there are other prophets that can come along on the way. And the second is that the Messiah, the Mahdi, is already here. And we should all work towards the betterment of our ways. And one of the ways to improve ourselves is to strive for peace, to oppose Islamic jihad and other forms of violence. They number a staggering 3,000 individuals, most of whom predominantly live in Haifa. They settled in Haifa in the 1920s, 1930s. There's some tension between mainstream Muslims and Ahmadis, but in Haifa, they seem to get along. And I think they're very known for advocating for peace, for shared society. So their presence in the room is actually very, very important. Yeah. Further questions? Yes?
Ali Polita, I'm a
Oh,
research
yes.
associate here.
Sorry for not recognizing you.
Yeah, no, great to finally see you in person. I'm just curious, when you're setting up a forum like this with a group of people that just have so much to have against each other, how do you go about knowing who the right people are to have in the room? How does that process happen? I'd just be curious to know.
I think there's a short answer to that one, but there's probably also a long one. But the short answer is, whoever is willing to sit in a room is the right person.
That can work, yeah.
And I guess the long answer, and this is something that has occurred to me recently as we're starting to work in other cities and finding it much more challenging, by the way, that if you put people, different people, on a scale from 0 to 10, and 0 represents divine law, and 10 represents an absolute humanist approach that centers everything on human agents. And in between, you have people who are closer to 0 or closer to 10. As long as you can place them on 1 to 9, there's hope. And they should be in the room. But if they see no other alternative but loyalty to divine law, or they see no other alternative than a kind of adherence to humanist values that reject all forms of spiritual belief in a divine entity. So if they're in a way that accepts something of that between 1 to 9, you can work with them.
You need some willingness.
A certain openness. even a tiny. So we started working 6 months ago in a city called Ramle. And over there, we brought in a group of rabbis and a group of Muslims and imams, and there's there are Catholics and Anglicans and Greek Orthodox in the city, and we started the project there as well. After 3 meetings, one of the rabbis has decided he no longer wants to be there. And we had some, as you can imagine, I've had quite a few conversations with that person, trying to get him to stay in the group. But he was very insistent. He's saying, these people, they support Hamas. I have nothing to talk with them. I feel that they're not sincere with me. They're not giving me the answers that I'm asking for. Of course, the answer that he's asking for is their support of Hamas. And if they reject Hamas's actions, then they're being insincere. So there is a no-win chance here. And what I realized as I was talking to him, that he's a 0 on the scale. He's got absolute loyalty to divine law. There is no room for human agency, because you can come into the room with a conviction in the rightfulness of divine law, but still attribute people some level of agency. But if you do not attribute them agency, then there is no chance for dialogue. So whoever has an openness to accept either one of those extremes in the room, they should be there.
I like both the long answer and the short answer.
How do you see the future of such a, say, cooperation or dialogue?
You know, interfaith dialogue is not an ancient, but it's an old enterprise. It's been there since, I guess, the 1930s, or even shortly before that, in Western society. And there have been initiatives of interfaith dialogue all over the world. It has been mostly dominated by Christian sentiments, but today we know that people are also appreciating other forms or other particles of interfaith dialogue that do not that are not generated by Christian theological principles. But it's there. And in Israel in particular, there are a variety of organizations that are conducting interfaith encounters and dialogues, etc. But when I believe you say in English, when push comes to shove, that's the expression. When push comes to shove and there are violent conflicts, all these interfaith works and dialogues, they don't seem to be effective. You don't see religious leaders helping in any way to quiet down the violence. You don't see their readiness to go out in the street and get people back into their houses, and you don't see any kind of readiness to speak in their mosque or their synagogues and to tell their congregations that calm down. And you ask yourself, why is that? I mean, so what's the point of all of this interfaith dialogue work if when in reality they seem to have very little impact? And when you start to analyze that interfaith work, there are 2 elements that seem to be lacking from them. The first is that the people who normally take part in these dialogues, they all come from, when it comes to Muslims and Christians, these would be people who could come from a variety of communities. But the Jews who are sitting there, they're mostly from liberal groups. But you don't see in the room people who are representing ideas that do not might not sound nice, but if you get them persuaded by the need to work with the other, then they could be very effective. So that's one of the things that is lacking in these interfaith initiatives. And the other thing that is lacking is moving from dialogue to work. Dialogue is seen as an objective in itself, whereas dialogue is merely a means for a much bigger objective. And in order to achieve that objective, you need to get people to be proactive. You need to get them to work together. So if these people that we've seen earlier would have stayed in the meeting room where the dialogue took place, I don't think we would get anywhere with that. But once they go together to schools, once they go to visit each other's communities, once they start thinking of how introducing other communities to their own communities, then you get them active and they start internalizing some of the ideals they have been talking about. And so, asking about the future, if we could have a multi-faith council such as the one we have in Haifa, in all mixed cities and environments in Israel, initiating joint projects between Jews, Muslims, Christians, and others, I think that could be a way to contribute maybe modestly to the reduction of conflict and violence between Jews and Arabs.